those scary Republicans and January 6th.
This is a pretty low point for Joe and Kamala.
Republicans in the states who are pursuing voter verification methods, they are just a continuation of the terror attacks of January 6th. Basically, you're all terrorists.
Make no mistake, Biden's so-called voting rights legislation is also incredibly toxic and unconstitutional.
Today, President Joe endorsed changing Senate rules regarding voting as Dems claim it's the biggest test of America's democracy since the Civil War. But sorry, Joe, this isn't even the biggest test since corn pop. It's just hyperbole. And that's why they have to keep saying it. I mean, no one needed convincing that 9/11 was bad a year later. For January 6th, however, never forget means we all literally would forget unless we make a big deal out of it every year. So now it's January 6th every day as Republicans engage in extreme attacks on our most basic constitutional right, voting. But now you see the point of the January 6th anniversary. The Dems need an emergency to change voting rules. It's 2020 all over again.
Joe Biden now has to rely on a secondary message for 2022, and so do the Democrats. That secondary message is Republicans are trying to stymie the vote. Okay, this is all crazy talk. If they think this is going to work, they're crazy. First of all, more Democrats voted in the last election cycle than in any election cycle in American history, and it is not close. If there's election stifling going on, there is no evidence that there is election stifling going on. There's less evidence that people are being kept from voting in the United States than that people are engaging in widespread voter fraud. Less evidence. Okay, so for all the people on the left who keep saying that Donald Trump is propagating the big lie by talking about electoral fraud and the notion that he won the 2020 election, it is a much bigger lie when you suggest that there are millions of people being disenfranchised at the ballot box. That is just a lie. It is not true at all. And yet this is what Democrats are relying upon.
Two things about Joe Biden's speech yesterday. One was the rhetoric, which was absolutely over the top, comparing the bills that are being pushed by Republicans around the country as racist, the equivalent of the civil rights movement. He compared them to the bombing of the Birmingham church and the Bloody Sunday. And suggested, as you just played, that anyone who opposes his political views, including members of his own party, by the way, are the equivalent of, racists like George Wallace or Bull Connor or Jefferson Davis. So it was really a divisive speech in that regard.
This is a pretty low point for Joe and Kamala, who are officially now toxic, even among members in their own party. Make no mistake, Biden's so-called voting rights legislation is also incredibly toxic and unconstitutional. Now, this bill, which would federalize elections, enables Democrats in Washington to ban voter ID, clear the way for ballot harvesting, and for illegal immigrants to participate in elections. You don't believe me? Look at New York City just this week. They gave the right of illegal immigrants to vote in municipal elections in New York City. Now, top Democrats are so passionate about the bill because they believe it is their surefire way to stay in power in perpetuity. In other words, just like their court packing idea, just like their ending of the filibuster idea, just like D.C. statehood, Puerto Rico statehood idea, it's all about a power grab and all about rigging the system. It doesn't have anything to do with actual voting rights.
What was the strategy behind this? What did he aim to accomplish by this? Because he knows, as we all know, he does not have the votes in the Senate. So he is driving around in a cul-de-sac, on a dead-end street with nowhere to go. And obviously the strategy in the short term is to rile up his base, is to get his base excited because we're now inside an election year. But the question is, will what he said yesterday, is that going to move anybody? Number one. And number two, is it going to motivate anyone outside of his base? And could it, in fact, inflict some sort of backlash from moderates and independents who didn't like the way that he framed this debate over voting, what Democrats call voting rights, but what Republicans call election integrity?
So Nancy Pelosi goes the furthest. She basically makes the argument that conservatives, Republicans, they ought to be treated like terrorists. She says January 6th was a terror attack. And then she also says that Republicans in the states who are pursuing voter verification methods, they are just a continuation of the terror attacks of January 6th. Basically, you're all terrorists.
There's nothing more important for us to do than protect our Constitution and our democracy. What the Republicans are doing across the country is really a legislative continuation of what they did on January 6th, which is to undermine our democracy.
It's a legislative continuation of January 6th undermining our democracy is the line. So this is the line they're going to carry into 2022. Good luck with this. You've got bad inflation. You've got bad COVID policy. You've got underemployment because not enough people are getting back into the labor force. You have a completely failed foreign policy. And Nancy Pelosi's pitch is that everybody who is pushing voter ID in states like Georgia was complicit in January 6th. Really, good luck with this.
But what she's saying is what they're doing now is a legislative continuation of what they did on January 6th. So what is it, Nancy, that Republicans are doing with these election bills? Well, they're doing things like ensuring that people have to have IDs to vote, making sure that you can't canvass right outside polling stations, making sure that mail-in ballots are more secure, making sure that we don't change election laws right before elections, a whole bunch of really sane stuff, unlike the story we covered yesterday in New York City, where they're going to allow 800,000 people who have been in the United States illegally for more than 30 days, they're going to be allowed to vote. We're not going to check IDs and the rest of it. So everything that they say is a lie. It's so weird.
But the problem is there is no action that can be taken because they don't have the votes in the Senate. Even if they did have the votes, as you pointed out earlier, Maria, this thing would be challenged in courts almost immediately. The constitutionality of it, which leaves it up to the states to regulate their own elections. And so this is a dead end for Democrats. And it's only going to, after all this fighting, it's only going to end in more disappointment. And this is why I think the Biden administration really needs to have some sort of reset or reboot, because right now, as I said, they're driving around in a cul-de-sac on a dead end street.